Hello and welcome to the Power to Speak, the podcast. And my guest today is Johnny Ball. And Johnny has very, very kindly sent me over an introduction that I can actually read from a sheet, which I love because introductions are my worst. So I'm going to go ahead with this, if that's okay, Johnny.
Yeah.
Before we introduce you completely. This is about Johnny. Johnny Ball is the host of Speaking Influence, the podcast about the psychology and application of influence and persuasion in life and business. He's a persuasive presentations coach, a professional speaker on topics like podcasting for thought leadership, ethical persuasion, and how to get your message noticed. An online coach and course creator, 12 years coaching and training with T. Harv Eker. He's president of a business networking club in Valencia, a leader and speaker within the Toastmasters organization, an entertaining and engaging guest with many stories and a wide range of life experiences. He says he's got a great radio voice and face, likes to keep things light and fun with laughter, although can be serious and surprisingly profound.
It does happen. Yeah.
It does happen. I mean, that is the best, isn't it? Just to be able to write your own introduction, to have it all in there, and not have someone like me ineptly just tripping over words.
Oh no, your voice has a lovely resonance to it and gravitas. You made me sound quite the authority, so I'm impressed. Thank you.
Yes. No, I think you are an authority. And I have to say, Johnny, I'm just so pleased to have you on my podcast because I feel like a complete newbie and a complete amateur in comparison to yours. So let's start with that. Let's tell us a little bit about the podcast, which, is present influence and what is it about? What is that you podcast about?
So the show is called Speaking Influence, and it's ultimately about influence and persuasion in life and business. That's not exactly how it started off, though. I have two really big interests in life, and one of them is public speaking and presentation skills. So I love doing all of that. It's a big passion. And I also have a deep fascination in the psychology of influence and persuasion, and have spent years learning about this and still do. I always am finding new things to learn and new understanding, and there's always research going on in these areas as well, which is uncovering new understandings and more things about that I can take advantage of and learn and hopefully pass on and teach to other people. So the show really is a resource for people to come and learn how to use ethical influence and persuasion. And it is important to say ethical influence and persuasion because a lot of people associate influence and persuasion with manipulation and with getting people to do things that they don't want to do. And that's not what we're about. However, a big part of the show for me is being able to help people understand how these things work so that you can also notice when people are using them in ways that are unethical and hopefully protect yourself from it too. So it has two sides to it. We do look at the white arts and the dark arts of influence and persuasion for the educational side, and really what I want people to be able to do is put good out into the world with these tools, which is what they really are designed for, and use good ethics and ecology behind them.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit then about the dark versus the light of influence and persuasion. I mean, it as you say, it does kind of sound a little bit scary when you feel like you are influencing people on purpose, is kind of, as you said, in that manipulation way. So how do you do that ethically?
There are different elements and levels of this. So we've all probably come across this idea of the pushy salesperson or the dodgy or sleazy salesperson. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people have a lot of stuff around sales and they don't really like sales, and they think, oh no, I hate sales, I don't want it, because that's what they associate with it. These people who are just not very ethical and they're just trying to sell you something, and they'll say whatever it takes to get you to buy something. And they'll try and manipulate you into that. Now, on some levels, that's fairly harmless. On some levels, that can actually get people to spend money that they don't want to, or end up buying rubbish that they don't really need, and not getting the best deal. It goes deeper than that, though, because often we are convinced into things that we would be better off not being convinced into. Cults would be one example of this, and that's probably where we get to the more extreme levels. we hear about mind control all the time, and people are worried about that and don't necessarily know how it works. And we've maybe seen films where it gets very misrepresented as to how mind control really works, and that you could actually get people to do things that you want to do. Like hypnosis doesn't really do all of that. You know, it's a much deeper level. But there are ways of getting people to conform into certain cultures and groupings, like cults. Not just cults, there are business cults, there are political cults, there are organizations or groupings where people get so fixed on an ideology and so fixed into the ways and practices of the group, and get all their information from the group, and get all of exactly what they're told to do, where they spend all their time, is all tied in with that, and it ends up taking over their lives. That's probably not good. I don't think any of us would think that is healthy. But the reality is, if you don't know how these things work, you also don't know how to protect yourself from them. Because we all think, oh, I'd never do that. I'd never get into something like that. And that is dangerous thinking. Because if you think that, but you don't actually know how any of that works, you already are susceptible to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're just putting me in mind there of the rhetoric of people like, maybe Donald Trump or some of the bigger influencers, and politicians in the world that somehow have a way of speaking that is, can be seen as quite manipulative, and they create great followings by
there
speaking
are a lot
that
of
way.
cult-like elements to what Trump does. In fact, there's a really good book on the cult of Trump by Stephen Hassan, who is now a doctor of psychology, and he escaped from the Moonies cult years ago. And he now helps other people to escape from that as well. But he did a deep dive analysis into the cult-like nature of everything that Trump says and the whole ecosystem around him. But you're right to say rhetoric as well, because there are these uses of rhetoric, with specific uses of language that are dehumanizing, that are controlling narratives in ways that make things that are actually very unpalatable sound quite palatable, and are enraging and angering people and dividing groups specifically for political gain and political purposes. And if we don't understand how those things are operating, we end up getting divided. We end up being people who are either suffering from it, either because our friends and family don't want to talk to us because we're into that, or we don't want to talk to our friends and family because they're into it, and the divisions just get deeper and deeper from there.
Yeah, well, that is obviously the deeper, darker side, and there's a lot of that sort of within social media, and we've seen all that within the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theories that are going on all around us. But let's get onto the good side. How can we influence and become good influencers for good? What do you say to people to help them put their message across and do good in the world?
The first thing is to have your message. You need to know what good you want to be putting out into the world. And it doesn't have to be completely fixed. You might not have the best idea of that, but you know that you want to do good. You know that you want to have a positive influence on things. That's a great place to start. But as you do start to get clearer as you progress with that as to what that message is going to be, when you understand things like utilizing rhetoric and utilizing public speaking and video and podcasts and all these tools for being out in the world, having your voice heard by people, and to be able to communicate in ways that are not just clear but also confident and emotional, and really show people that you have a passion for what you're talking about, then you start to get into this level of believability where it's just people will listen to what you're saying and take notice of you. And a lot of that comes from your own personal confidence.
So going back to the podcast, how did the podcast start for you? Was it something that came out of this psychology and this kind of thought around influencing? Was it something that started from there, or was it something other?
Yeah, it's a mixture of things, to be honest with you, Jackie. It's a mixture of things. So I am what we could call a frustrated actor. I did drama and music at university and stuff. And so there's a performer inside of me. But I didn't have the heart to go through and make that my life. It wasn't really what I wanted enough to do that. So that part is always there. It's still with me now. And I got into public speaking probably about 15 years ago or so, and just fell in love with it. Really enjoyed it and started doing it. I started getting involved with Toastmasters and things like that, and started doing different public speaking trainings. And that developed alongside my interest and passion for psychology of influence and persuasion as well. Now, I started my first podcast back in 2012 and maybe did about 8 or 10 episodes or something like that. And then it just sort of disappeared, disappeared off the tracks. And I lost interest in it. And it was early days in podcasting. No one was really listening to it anyway. I think maybe some of them had 5 or 6 downloads or something like that. Nothing much happened. But then it came up as an option to do in my Toastmasters club here in Valencia, where I live. And I just thought, oh, there's only one of the options. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll start a podcast. And I didn't know that I was going to continue doing it, but I thought it would be a fun project. So I did. And I thought it only made sense for me to do a show that was going to be about my 2 biggest passions, which were public speaking and presentation skills and tools of influence and persuasion. And that's where it started. And almost 2 years later, it's still going.
Yeah. Fabulous. I mean, and I know we've had a conversation before that it's kind of, you are in Valencia anyway. I am in the UK, but in lockdown, and maybe this happened for you before, that everything's kind of gone global. So have you found that more over the last year or so that you're reaching further?
I am perhaps in an enviable position to some people in that most of my work has been remote and online since around 2012, maybe even a bit before that. So I did not need to be based in one specific location, and other than some public speaking work and some seminars and live events, most of what I do has been online. So I was already very prepared and set up for that. Although I would admit, even for me, the massive increase in the amount of Zoom meetings that I started having with people started getting to me after a while. I got some Zoom fatigue as well. But I was already very well set up for doing online events, webinars. The podcast was already running long before the pandemic started. And so everything was already happening online. For me, yeah. It wasn't a transition period. It really was just, for me, it ended up being an opportunity to focus even more on those things without other activities taking my attention away from it. So the bigger problem for me was adjusting back afterwards and trying to add those things, real life things, back into my life and keep time for everything.
Yeah. I mean, you seem to have a few hats that you have with the online courses, with, you know, the courses that you have on your website, and the podcast, plus the speaking. How do you manage to juggle all those things? And how do you manage to deliver your message consistently across all of those platforms?
I'm not altogether sure I manage it consistently across all of those, to be honest. I attempt to. It all comes down to prioritization. I was lucky that, you know, I started doing the work with Harv Eker a long time ago, and so that very much is just a continuation of things that I've been doing for years. I don't have to give it too much attention, and I don't have to do huge amounts of preparation or anything like that for it. Like, I'm very familiar with all the content that I deliver there, and I have some amazing clients who I work with in ways that I'm very familiar in working with people. So for me, that is an easier part of my life that I don't have to give huge amounts of additional work to. So everything else kind of goes on top of that. The podcast goes on top of that. My own online courses and programs, my own speaking and stuff is all on top of that. And splitting time between all of those, I admit, is very challenging. And I just do the best I can. That's really it. I try to do what I can reasonably do. And sometimes I do have to say no to things, and that's often the hardest thing to get myself to do. Some things are just great opportunities and I can't say no to them, but some things I just can't fit into. I just don't have the capacity to add them into my weeks. And it's lovely being busy doing the stuff that you love doing, but there is still a limit to how much you can actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that is, you know, I love doing the podcast, but yes, it's how much time it takes versus how much you get back from it. So have you managed to, it sounds very rude to ask, but have you managed to monetize the podcast because of the time it takes? I mean, certainly with me do my podcast, I do it really at the moment because I love talking to people and I love finding out about what they do. But
Yeah.
it would be great to have some advice from you as to how that kind of then progresses or develops.
Sure. So even if you have a new show, you probably should still be thinking about setting it up for monetization. And even shows with smaller audiences have the potential for monetization. So I have a few channels through which I have that available. One is that people can buy me a coffee for $5 a month, or people can sign up to a membership level for my show, which like for $15 a month they get exclusive invites to join me live in the virtual studio with my guests. So depending on what the topic is going to be, they're going to get advance notice of what we're going to be talking about, and they can come and join us live and potentially have the opportunity to have their questions put to the guests as well. So that's just one monetization option. The other ones would be if you are someone who has your own products and services, if, for example, you have online courses and the likes, then it would really only make sense, especially if your podcast is related to the stuff that you do, that you promote that as a pre-roll or mid-roll ad in your show, that you have an advert for your own stuff. And even at this stage, you go on other people's podcasts and maybe they come on yours, what we're doing, right? You can set up with another podcast and say, hey, look, I have an ad that I have for my stuff, for my show. Would you run an ad for my show on your podcast? And whilst you do that, I'll run an ad for your show on my podcast. And then you cross promote with each other's audiences. So I think definitely want to be looking for those ways to build audience, but also you want to be looking for those opportunities to monetize. And most people are not really going to be looking at sponsorship until you really get into the top 1% or higher of podcasts globally, where you're getting 10,000 plus downloads an episode. And most shows are not getting that. Now, the average number of downloads for the average podcast is about 25, 26 downloads an episode. That's a huge difference to the 10,000 or 100,000 plus that people would be looking for sponsorship deals and things. So that doesn't mean you can't still monetize. You can have affiliate things. You know, I get book recommendations from people, so I put links to my Amazon affiliates up there for any books that get recommended on the show. There's all those kinds of things that can potentially add income to your show. But I do think if anyone is doing a podcast, and you'll hear this said amongst the podcast community worldwide, if your primary reason for doing a podcast is monetization, you're in the wrong game, because it takes a long time to monetize a podcast, and it's not easy. There are easier ways, there are quicker ways. YouTube channels are probably a lot quicker to monetize than podcasts. So podcasting is a long game, and it's a very intimate format to connect with people, often much more so than video can be. But if monetization is the primary objective, I recommend trying something else, because you will end up getting frustrated and not sticking with podcasting. But if monetization is a byproduct of that and something that you are willing to put off and you'll keep doing it anyway because you love doing the podcast, then great. Hopefully it will be something that eventually starts to allow you to support the show and to batch out some of those jobs that take up a long time, so that you can focus more on the content creation rather than the production and editing side.
Yeah, no, brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you. I mean, just the fact that the average downloads are 25, that makes me feel great. So I'm in the right ballpark. And as I say, you know, most people, I would hope, start a podcast because they're talking to people that they are interested in and that, you know, have something positive to say. So exactly why I do it.
It's important to know, because it's such a long game. Most people, when they start a podcast, don't know any of this stuff. I didn't when I started. It's all things I've learned along the way. But when you start to know things, like it takes on average about 2 years to really get the show to a level where it's starting to get decent downloads and getting to that tipping point of audience build. That really is a long game. And although 2 years, when we just say it, doesn't sound like a long time, week by week it is. It's a long time to see those download stats not going up very high, to not be seeing the interaction in those early days from your audience. But when that starts to come, when you start seeing the interaction, when you start seeing people sharing your show out, when you start learning more about podcasting as an art form, really, because it is. It's a medium and it's an art. There's an art to it as well. You get better and better at it. But if you can actually make it to those 2 years and beyond, you've got a very good chance of getting into those top percentiles. Like my show is in the top 10 globally, which sounds impressive, but to podcasters who've been around a while, it's not. So it just means I've been going for a long time and I've been consistent, and I have decent downloads. But I'm still not at those high levels yet. But I know that I'm capable of that, and that the show is as well, so long as I stick with it. And that's the hardest part, is sticking with it and keeping going, even when it gets challenging or even when you feel like throwing in the towel.
Yeah. So what would you say is your biggest learn from the last 2 years? What's your your what you've learned most or most valuable?
Well, it depends. It depends on what aspect. I mean, if you mean like personally about myself, that would be very different to what I've learned sort of professionally. So I can tell you both if you want.
Yes, tell us both.
Okay, so for me personally, it has been a lesson in patience, and so much of life is. The thing is, most people say some things like when you start a business and like it can take up to 3 years to make that business profitable. And most people don't want to hear that thing, I can make it profitable in weeks or months. And yet, realistically, most people can't. The reality ends up being it can take up, especially if you do things officially, properly, it can take up to 3 years to actually make your business fully profitable. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be making any money. It just means you might just be sort of making enough to live. You might be just getting by for a while before it really starts to get up to those higher levels. But most people aren't prepared to wait for those kinds of results, and so this has really been a lesson for me in terms of you have to want it more than you want to quit. It almost rhymes. You have to want it more than you want to quit, and that is a big thing, because otherwise, when things do get challenging, when you're not seeing your figures go up in the right direction, when you're not seeing the monetization come through, you're not seeing the interaction, all those things that podcasters want to see from their audiences, it gets disheartening, and you think, why am I doing this? Why am I carrying on? Who am I doing this for? If you can't be in the place where it's like, well, even if I'm getting 2 or 3 downloads and those are people who are enjoying the show, it is worth doing. If I'm enjoying it and they're enjoying it, I will keep going, because in time, a handful of loyal listeners are going to tell other people about it. Other people who will share their interests and share your show. And that might start to double your numbers. And that might continue to double and double. It just takes such a long time, but it's absolutely worth waiting for. So on a personal level, it is working from that playing the long game of going for those. You have to look for the future long-term rewards and place that much higher than the immediate gratification, and trust that it's out there. So on a personal level, that's particularly important. And whilst that is kind of a professional lesson as well, but the biggest professional lesson that I've learned from all of this, and probably the biggest thing I've got from podcasting that I never had before I started it, has been building a connected and generous and delightful network of podcasting friends. And the networking through podcasting, if I'd known about that, it's something I would advise anyone to do podcasting just for that one aspect. Because just the people you get to meet, the vast majority of people are doing podcasts because they care about their topic. They care about something. Maybe that's an entertainment thing they care about, or maybe it's politics, maybe it's comedy, maybe it's influence and persuasion, maybe it's public speaking. Whatever it is, they care about their topic and they care about their audience, and they want to explore these things well, and they want to discuss it with interesting people. And they're not really in it because they want to say, I want to make as much money from this as I can, for the most part. So you don't really get too many of those kind of cynical money grabbing people, because, as I said before, it's such a long game in podcasting. It's not a big money thing straight away. It takes too long for the people who want the get rich quick stuff to stick around. So that's a good thing and a bad thing, because it means that the people who are in it for the wrong reasons probably won't stick around very long, and they'll be gone very quickly. And the people who are, hopefully will push through those tough times and stick with it and put good out into the world, but they'll also meet and connect with lots of amazing people. And I've made so many wonderful friends through podcasting, and have such a valuable network of people. We all help each other out. Most of the people who I speak to on my show, I could go to outside of the show and just say, hey, remember when we had that chat? And nearly all of them will say the same thing. I often say to people, if there's anything else I can help you with outside of this, or you want to have a chat about any stuff, drop me a line, get in touch. That's part of what I'm here for, because we genuinely want to help.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's great. I feel part of that network now. Absolutely.
You are part of that network. by deciding to start a podcast, you have become part of that network.
Yeah, fabulous. So what would be the dream then for you, in say 5 years' time? Would it be that the podcast is the main thing, or is the podcast still there to kind of promote the other things that you do?
It's an interesting one. Yeah, I would love to spend my time podcasting professionally. If the podcast was making the kind of income that allowed me to do more podcasting more of the time without having to worry too much about other stuff, I would spend most of my time podcasting, because I absolutely love it. But I also love helping other people start their podcasts. So I've been doing coaching now with people to plan and launch their shows, and working with people to help them on marketing and monetization strategies. And I honestly love that. I get invited now to speak all over the place. In fact, I'm speaking at the end of this month at the Podfest festival. It's online. It's going to be an online event for Podfest. I'll give you the information if you want to let other people know about it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be giving a presentation about influence and persuasion for podcasters. But at many of the other events I talk about, I get invited to go and speak about podcasting and why I think people should start podcasts, especially if they're looking to become thought leaders in their industry, if they're looking to have their voice heard. Seth Godin, the godfather of marketing, says that podcasting is the new blogging. This is the place for thought leadership, and I believe him too. Pat Flynn's out there saying the same thing. I'm saying the same thing. Many people out there saying podcasting, there's no other platform where you could get 30 minutes, 45 an hour, where you are in somebody's earphones, earbuds or headset, whispering directly into their ears with your conversations, and getting to spend that amount of quality time with people where you talk about the stuff that you love, and set yourself up as an authority, whether that's as a show host or whether it's as being a guest on other people's shows. Podcasting is a very, very powerful medium that is only growing. It is becoming a bigger and bigger medium as more people come to it. More celebrities are starting podcasts, which means that more people are aware that podcasting is there and tuning into them to hear their celebrities that they like, but also they're discovering these other podcasts as well that are out there.
Yeah. No, it seems to, when I started this one almost a year ago now, the first question I asked to other people that were podcasting was, do you think there's too many? I mean, is the market saturated? And here we are a year later, and there seems to be even more. But as you're saying, it's almost another way of promoting, another way of influencing, another way of putting what it is that you do out there. So can there be too many?
I don't think so. And here's why. You may know this, but before the pandemic and stuff, there was over 1 million podcasts out there. But since the pandemic, and the last time I checked, and I haven't checked the statistics all that recently, there's over 2 million. So I know I can safely say there's over 2 million podcasts. However, estimates are that between 50 and 75% of those are active, and the rest aren't. So that really is around like 75,000 podcasts or less that are active podcasts, active shows that are consistently putting out regular episodes. That's not that big. When you compare that to, was it something like 32 million YouTube channels, or 5 million plus blogs, it's not a lot. It's not a lot. No. So no. And also for the thing of like, some people will do shows that are for a specific topic, and then they'll do that and they'll stop it. Some people will do a show that's just to promote one thing, or that it'll run its course very quickly. Most podcasters don't actually ever make it past 6 or 7 episodes before they decide that it's not worth the bother and quit. And so those podcasters who actually continue on past that, maybe make it into a year is a big achievement, Jackie. Making it to 2 years is a big achievement. Making it beyond that is bigger and bigger achievements. They are achievements, and they are testaments to your stick-with-itness, and the audience will come. You have to trust that it's out there. You'll find your audience. You'll find your voice through podcasting, and all of that will come. And the longer you stick with it, the more that will build up. So your audience is not all of the podcasting listenership. Your audience is the people who listen to podcasts, who like the kind of stuff that you talk about, the way that you talk about it. And those people will tell other people like them about you, and they might come and discover podcasts and discover you and your show as well. Whereas other people, many other podcast listeners are going to go and discover other shows that aren't yours, or have other interests that don't relate to what you talk about. Is there, because are there too many books? There's lots of books around the same topics, lots of people talking about the same things, but everybody is saying something different in a different way. Everyone is relating to audiences in a different way. Everyone has their own experience and levels of expertise to bring to the table as well that is different to someone else's, and some that people will connect with and some that people won't. And different people will connect with the different things. So could there be too many podcasts? I don't think so.
No.
We're never going to get to a point where everyone's going to have their own podcast, even though it might sometimes feel like that, because most people won't stick with it long enough. And that's a reality of life. One of the reasons why most people don't have what they want isn't always that they don't know what they want. That's a big part. But the bigger part is they don't stick with it long enough. They give up before they get any real progress with it.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think it is, there's a certain art to certainly making a show of a podcast, making it interesting enough. I mean, obviously you have a very, very specific theme, as I did when I very first started mine. Mine was all around creativity and how you could use creativity for your business. And yours is obviously very much around public speaking and influencing and presentation. Yeah. So how do you find your guests? Do you go and find them, or do they come and find you? How does that work?
It's a mix. But I will say this. Since I focused my show to being much more about the psychology and application of influence and persuasion, my audience numbers have grown significantly, because it's a much clearer niche of what we talk about on the show. And whilst that still incorporates public speaking or these other things, people are much clearer what the show is actually about, and they have a much better idea of that's what they want to listen to. So if your show description is too vague, people don't really get what you're going to be talking about, then they don't know why they should listen to it. But that also gives me a much better clue for who I should be bringing on the show, who I should be speaking to. And I want to speak to people who have something to add. I don't want to speak to people where I'm having the same conversation all the time with different people. So I might speak to a lot of different public speakers, but I'm not going to speak to them about exactly the same things. Some of the same things may come up, because there are always themes you're going to hear. But there are always different ways of expressing it. There are always different questions you can ask and different things to explore. So from that perspective, I want to speak to, as I do this on the show, public speakers, psychologists. I've spoken to people in the Secret Service. I've spoken to people who've escaped from religious cults. I want to talk about all these different aspects of influence and persuasion. And so if I get an application for someone who wants to be on the show from someone who has nothing to say on influence and persuasion, I'm going to turn it down. Now, even if they have a huge following, I'm going to turn it down, because they're not relevant to what the show's about, and that doesn't serve me or the audience. It might look very tempting when they have the vanity metrics that look, I've got all these following, and it's like, but if you're not relevant to my show or my audience, I don't know what we're going to talk about. And I don't want to have people on my show just because they can talk about their thing, but they're not actually relevant to what my show's about. So I think it's very important to stay true to what your show is about. So there are times when I find people who I just see them, like I read their books, or I see content they're posting online, or they connected to someone I know, and they seem very relevant people. And then a lot of the time, there are people who have been on the show or listened to the show or know that I do the show who connect me with people they say would be a good guest, which is how we got in touch, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there are people who are on the podcast connector channels. So there are LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups. There's Matchmaker FM, there's Pod Booker, Pod Match, all these podcasting services that are like dating sites for podcasters to match up shows and guests.
Yeah.
And they can be a great place as well. And they can also be a great place to get lots of applications from people who aren't a good fit. And that's why it's so important to know what you want to talk about and be very specific about that and know who is the right kind of guest for your show and who isn't.
Yeah. No, that's great advice for me, actually, because I do feel like I'm at that point now where I need to hone down, because people are kind of coming out of the woodwork and wanting to be a guest, which is fabulous. You know, the fact that they actually want to is great, but you're absolutely right. I need to be, sort of looking at people that are relevant to what it is that I'm talking about.
Yeah, but don't fall in. Just want to say for you personally, for anyone who's listening who's down this path or thinking of going down this path, don't get too hung up on it either. It doesn't need to be perfect all the time. I have recorded and even put out shows with guests who were not a great fit for the show, and I've also recorded shows that I haven't put out with people where it just hasn't gone well, or just decided actually that's just so not relevant to the show and things like that. Sometimes you're going to end up recording stuff that isn't great. But sometimes just because it's not great doesn't mean you shouldn't still put it out. It's all part of your evolution and your process to development. I would say though, if it's actually just a bad show, I would be thinking I would be in two minds as to whether to actually publish it, because it's going to be sat there as part of your listeners, and your listenership might be, even if it's a small listenership, might listen to it and think, what on earth are you putting that? What happened here? What went wrong? But for you, it's useful, and so we shouldn't look at any of this as mistakes. It's all part of your learning journey.
Yeah. Have you done that? Have you had to go back to somebody and say, I'm not putting that out? Do you tell little white lies and give excuses?
No, sometimes I've done both approaches. At first, I was very honest about it, and I told people exactly why I wasn't putting it out. So without naming any names, and it was very unlikely the people that this happened with would be tuning into this. But one person, she started talking about all of this sort of law of attraction and spirituality stuff, which is fine, but it's not what I'm into, and it's not what my show's about. And I'm not a very sort of spiritual woo-woo kind of person, so I'm just listening to thinking, this is kind of crap, but also the way she was speaking was really patronizing to the audience, like a school teacher talking to a nursery group of children. It was very condescending and talking at rather than talking with, and so those things just make me think, I can't put that episode out. It stinks. As an episode for me, it stinks, and I'm not comfortable with it. And then I had another guy who was in my business network and asked to be a guest on my show. And it seemed like when we had a pre-show chat, it seemed like he was going to be a great guest. But I couldn't get him to get to the point on one single thing he talked about through the whole interview. And it was all just vague. Like, he had some great ideas, but none of it was clear. And I said to him afterwards, I just don't think you are advanced enough with this, and that you even know enough about what this is yet for me to be able to put it out and for it to look good for you, let alone for me on my show. Now I just tend to say things like, oh, no, there's a problem with the recording. I shouldn't be telling you this. It's like, sorry, Jackie, I'm not putting out. There's a problem with the recording. I'm giving away my secrets. But yeah, I'll say there's a problem with the recording or something like that. But yeah, there are episodes which I thought were going to be great, and a lot of times we'll do swaps with people. I'll come on their show, they'll come on mine. And we'll have a great chat when I'm on their show, and then they come on mine and they give monosyllabic answers, the bad rapport or something, like come in a bad mood. I don't know, but something just goes wrong, and it's like, okay, I'm not putting that out, So it can end up feeling like a bit of time wasted, but still better not to put that stuff out if you're really not happy with it.
Yeah, good advice. So let's go back to the beginning, Johnny. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, a ballerina, definitely. What did I want to be? Oh my goodness, so many different things. I didn't know, and I still don't. For a while, I thought I wanted to be a policeman, and then I actually went and it's like auditioned. I went and interviewed for the police, and thankfully didn't get in. I'm very pleased about that now. At the time, not so much. Then I decided at some point I wanted to be a flight attendant, and I went and did that for 12 years. So, I mean, that was a lot of fun. When I was a kid, more than anything, I wanted to be Spider-Man or Superman, and that was probably never going to happen. So, there was no particular career ambitions. I didn't really know what I wanted. I drifted for the longest time. So I've been very lucky that I've just kind of fallen into things that have ended up being really good for me and a really good fit. Like being a flight attendant for 12 years was a lot of fun for me.
That sounds quite like Superman. You know, you were flying. Yeah,
I got to fly. That was something. But I mean, serving people drinks and flinging meal trays at them at 35,000 feet, not that heroic, really.
Yeah, but obviously something you enjoyed to stay in it for that amount of time.
Yeah, I would say around 10 years of doing it, I knew that I was kind of ready to go, move on from it. It wasn't fulfilling some of my deeper needs. I knew I could have stayed there. I could have stayed there forever and been content, but I had these deeper wants of wanting to do coaching, wanting to do public speaking, and wanting to do more to help people in the world that were not going to be fulfilled through getting on a jumbo or an A380 every week.
Yeah, but I think there are transferable skills, aren't there, through everything we do. I mean, my background is acting. I was an actor for a blink of a second, really, but it's for me, I think the acting comes back to psychology, liking people, wanting to know what makes people tick, the motivation, all of those things. And actually it sounds like everything that you do is kind of similar, you know, that interest in people. And you can't be flying from one country and looking after people without actually being interested in people. And
anyone who's
what you're doing now.
Anyone who's ever flown with British Airways can tell you that not everybody who's cabin crew is super happy and friendly. There's a reason why a lot of people say that BA cabin crew look like horses, you know, it's that sort of but no, I was generally pretty happy. I loved that job, and I love people. I love connecting with people, and I've got lots of great stories from that time as well, which I love to tell. Some of them suitable for broadcast, and some of them not so suitable for broadcast, but you know, nonetheless a lot of stories. But definitely, I mean, if anyone ever wants to know where the emergency exits are, I'm your guy, and so I'm very good at all that. But I used to do all the announcements. I loved doing the announcements on the plane, so that maybe is something that ties in with the speaking stuff. I always loved hobnobbing. I used to work in first class a lot, so I used to speak to a lot of celebrities and dignitaries and things like that, and you just get used to speaking to people as people, because they're people. And so I think a lot of that helped set me up for things in the future. A lot of the work I did then with personal development organizations and with Harvek after that has set me up for everything that I do now. So I've been very, very lucky in my progress.
Yeah. So what was the transition though from flight attendant to the next step? How did that work?
So around, I'm trying to think what year it was, around 2000, 2001. 2000, I discovered what life coaching was. I'd never heard of it before. And I just thought, you know, I was interested in psychology, but I didn't really like psychoanalysis, and I didn't really want to become a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So when I've discovered coaching, that's something that seemed very, very solution focused and actually helping people, that was already kind of my wheelhouse, if you like. I was already one of those people that often people will come to me with stuff that's going on with them and talk about stuff, but I'm not the kind of person who just listens. I'm not a counsellor. I'm the person who I'll listen, and then I'm going to say, well, what are you going to do about that? what's going to be the change here? What's going to be different? Are you happy with that? What are you going to do now? So I'm not just someone who just says, well, tell me everything that's bad in your life right now and just dump that all on me and then go away with no solution, feeling lighter for having shared it. It's like, there's a place for that, but that's not how I work. So coaching seemed to fit with how I naturally work, which is like, come and tell me what's going on and tell me what's not working in your life right now. But don't expect that you're going to get to go away from that without some kind of plan of action for what you do next. And so learning how to do that in a more formal structure was pretty cool for me. And it was, I think, a year after that, I was flying on September the 11th, 2001, and that was an incident that woke me up to not really wanting to be cabin crew forever as well. And so when it came a bit later on, I spent those years afterwards learning my craft and working in the personal development industry part-time, coaching part-time, whilst I was still flying around the world. And so when the opportunity came up to take a redundancy package from the airline, I thought to myself, well, I can either leave with nothing when I'm ready to go, or I can take this redundancy package now, leave with a financial buffer and with some travel perks and things as well. It just seemed too good to miss. So I took my redundancy offer and decided to go for it. And whilst I kind of fell at the first hurdle with my first attempt at business, I kept going. Yeah. I got over it. Eventually, it nearly broke me the first time my stuff failed in my business, but I got past it and I built back up again because I realized that quitting wasn't an option. But the good thing from that ended up being that I now know that I can lose everything because I did. I can lose everything and still build back and build stronger from it. So I'm not afraid of losing everything anymore like I was. No. I think a lot of people operate with that huge fear of everything that could go wrong hanging over them. I'm not saying I would want that or choose that for myself, but I don't fear it because I know I'd survive it. And that's what I didn't know beforehand, that I could survive that and come back stronger for it.
Yeah, no, I'm a great believer in what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that is one of those things that people are kind of are scared of. That there's a huge fear around that, and actually, it's not until you've been through something like that. I mean, even to be in the air on September the 11th must have just been something, as you say, a huge wake up call for you.
Yeah, it was a surreal experience in many ways. That we were halfway. My flight was halfway to San Diego when we got turned around, and. And then we actually got woken up. I was on crew rest and we got woken up and told what had happened, and we weren't allowed to tell the passengers because we didn't want any of them panicking. And but it ended up with all sorts of things going on the flight, and thankfully, we were one of the few flights that were able to actually land back into Gatwick, which not everyone was. After several diversions, we made it back to Gatwick on the same day, and my parents came and met me at the airport because they were worried. And it was definitely a wake up call. Like, well, maybe this isn't my forever job. So it wasn't like it made me want to leave the airline industry. It just made me at least realize that there was more to life, and that perhaps I should explore those other areas a bit more.
Yeah. Is that where the Stoic philosophy comes in for you?
No, that was...
Tell me a little bit about what Stoic philosophy is.
Okay, so most people, when they hear the word Stoic, they tend to think it's all like emotionless and stiff upper lip kind of thing. It gets associated with Britishness or with Englishness, the keep calm, carry on kind of mentality. That's not really what Stoicism is. Stoicism it's one kind of Stoicism, I guess, but Stoicism in its philosophical form is a practice that came from the ancient Greek and Roman Stoics, who really just had a very pragmatic approach to life, and would work on accepting those things that are tough and challenging in life and preparing ourselves for them, and working on moving away from this thing that we could call catastrophizing. I guess we kind of just referred to it a little while ago. Like, we tend to imagine all the worst possible scenarios, the worst outcomes.
Yeah.
We tend to spend a lot of our time focused on everything that could go wrong in life, or every ailment or adversity that could affect us and be inflicted upon us. When often those things don't ever happen, we just spend more and more time worrying about them. But also sometimes when they do happen, we're not psychologically capable of dealing with them. We don't have the mental resilience perhaps to be able to cope with them a lot of the time. So we can end up having an emotional breakdown because we don't have that capability built into us to be able to deal with the realities, the harsh realities of life. And one thing we all know about life, anyone who's alive knows that life can be hard. Life is tough, and it's not easy to get through it. But if we don't at least try to give ourselves some psychological resilience, it's only going to be tougher when things do inevitably get challenging and get to a point where it's pushing the boundaries of your capacity to cope with challenge and change. So that's a lot of what Stoicism is about. It sounds miserable, right? But it's not, because there's a practice from the ancient Stoics which I really love, and it's called a negative visualization. And most life coaches will probably hate me for saying this, but it's where you actually get people to visualize losing the people and the things in life that they love and care about. And it sounds horrible. All my law of attraction friends out there will hate this. Like, oh, you're going to attract all this negative stuff in your life. No, here's why. Because you're going to push through just visualizing how awful that would be, and push through it and really sit with it and get to a point where you start to process it in advance, and you start to recognize how valuable those things are to you in your life now, whilst accepting that everything you have in your life and everyone you have in your life, you included, is temporary. Everything is temporary. None of it is going to be here forever. The only things we can promise and guarantee are change. Death and taxes. We know those things are coming, and we can't do a lot about them. So what this is designed to do is to help us have that mental preparation for, not to plan for everything to go wrong or to lose everything, but to know that we will be able to get through it, and that we appreciate and value the good things in our life and the good people in our lives now, whilst they are here, so we don't get complacent and take them for granted. Now, other practices from the Stoics were things like going without something you love for a while. Like the Christian religion has the Anglican, or Church of England at least, have the Lent, right? Yeah. And so, you go for that period of Lent without something that you enjoy. That's the idea of it, I think. So the same kind of thing. Not to do anything other than to be able to resist that and to appreciate it more when you allow it back into your life. To know that you are not the servant of your desires, but that you can still enjoy them in your life, and you can choose not to. You can choose to abstain from them for a while as well. And again, it's good mental strengthening, mental conditioning. This is why some of the reasons why I love Stoicism. It's a very practical level philosophy that doesn't require spirituality, but also doesn't push against it either. So there are many spiritual Stoics, and there are many atheist Stoics as well. I'm one of the more atheistic Stoics for sure. And this is also something that perhaps makes me a bit of an outlier in the personal development world. There's not too many of us non-spiritual atheists who are doing coaching and things like that. So.
Oh no, that's so interesting. One of my former podcast guests, is a philosopher called Tom Morris, American, brilliant. If you get a chance to listen to that one, fantastic. And he wrote a book called Plato's Lemonade Stand that I read, which was around that. Was it? Everything. We all have to face change, and it is about that kind of moment in the sky on September the 11th, when suddenly you don't know what's coming next, and there's going to be a big change coming, and it is kind of dealing with that, where your life almost flashes before your eyes, all those good things, all those people you love, all that sort of that sort of coming to the fore, and it exactly as you say is kind of getting through that to kind of getting to that point where you can deal with that, change.
I've always loved philosophy anyway, but I didn't really come into contact with Stoicism, and I think it was people like Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday who really went about helping it to become a popular branch of philosophy again. Certainly, there were already people out there who were into it and teaching it, and Donald Robertson, who is quite a well-known Stoic philosopher, has been a guest on my show. And I really wanted him I knew I wanted him as a guest on my show, but it was trying to find the right reasons and right things to talk to him about that would be a fit with the audience. And when he released his book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, there's so much of that was really about understanding gravitas and Marcus Aurelius's journey into the world of becoming a speaker, an orator, understanding the difference between the sophists and the orators, and he was someone who had the belief that if you're going to take to a stage and do any kind of public speaking presentations, people should be changed as a result of it. It shouldn't just be to entertain them; it should be to transform them, and so people should be changed as a result of listening to you. Now, I tend to think we can have a bit of both. We can have a bit of entertainment and a bit of transformation as well. But yeah, fascinating. And so that particular episode was, for me, a masterclass in understanding things like gravitas and the levels of thinking that it takes for that kind of leadership. And what an inspiration someone like Marcus Aurelius really was and still is in the world of leadership and thought leadership particularly.
Yeah, no, that's a name that has come up so often in the last year. I was never particularly a philosopher before lockdown, but certainly sort of, with everything that's gone on over the last year, to look back at what those guys were saying back then, it's been quite inspirational.
Well, you know what, the Stoic philosophy is actually the basis for cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT, and it is one of the most effective behavioural change therapies that there is. But Donald Robertson is one of the people who is involved in the development of CBT. And so when you think about it from those terms of how it really looks at how we approach things, how we think about things and frame things in our lives, that decatastrophizing things, having a more rationalistic and reasonable approach to things, it makes a lot of sense that it would be a very good grounding for something that actually helps people change their behaviours as well.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Well, it's been amazing talking to you, Johnny. I've really, really enjoyed it. I mean, going everything from podcasting to philosophy. I mean,
I told you it could get deep at times, right? It can get profound at times.
Yeah. Well, no, absolutely. That's what it said it there. I should have known. Oh, brilliant. Well, I'm going to put up, for those of you that are watching this podcast, I'm going to show Johnny. I think that is the podcast, isn't it? That's the podcast link.
Oh, I think that's the link through my website. So I think if you use that link, it will take you to my website where you can listen to it there. But if anyone wants to listen to my podcast, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere with podcast that provides podcasts, and type in "Speaking Influence" and you'll find my show.
Well, that's, I think, let's see if I can. There.
That's me.
Speaking Influence. There you go.
That's me.
See, StreamYard is good for some things.
It's great. It's a great platform.
Yes, yeah. And is there anywhere else people can contact you? I think I have your LinkedIn. No, that's the website.
People are definitely welcome to check out the website. You can take my quiz to find out how persuasive you are. You can download my my ebook for how to make money out of podcasts without having your own podcast. So that's all on the website. But yeah, I absolutely encourage you, connect with me there, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm usually hanging out there at various points. If you find me anywhere on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, those are the two I hang out on the most. And which yesterday was good, right? Yesterday that was very advantageous with everything else shut down.
Fabulous. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really invaluable. I will go back now. I'm gonna go back with my notebook and write lots of notes.
That means I've really delivered some value. So that's fantastic.
Yes,
that's what I'm all about.
You certainly have. For anybody into podcasting or philosophy, you have. It's been amazing. So thank you very much, Johnny. And I look forward to seeing you on yours.
Yeah, I look forward to switching roles when you come on my show, Jackie. It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed it. You're definitely a great podcast host. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You're a great podcast host and guest. Lovely. Thank you, Johnny. Speak to you very soon.
Pleasure.
Bye.